Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are focusing on a challenge that has, persisted in the U.S. despite decades of effort and just trillions of dollars spent.
Persistent poverty.
Exactly. But we aren't just looking at the statistics of the problem. We're
Mhm.
diving into the uh, absolutely crucial and I think often overlooked role that leadership plays in actually getting people out of that cycle.
That's right. And for this, our source material is a really fascinating piece of qualitative research. It's a study looking specifically at civic organizations in Virginia.
So nonprofits, community groups, that kind of thing.
Yep, all of them. And the goal was to find the most effective leadership strategies being used right now to break these cycles.
And Virginia is a really interesting laboratory for this. I mean, poverty is a major national struggle, but Virginia is actually doing a bit better than the national average,
Right. In 2023, their poverty rate was 10.2%.
which is about 2 points lower than the country as a whole. And importantly, both their poverty rate and their income inequality have been declining since 2017.
So the big question is, what are the organizations in a state that's seeing some positive movement doing differently? The research team interviewed 14 representatives from these organizations.
And these are groups dealing with everything from housing and education to legal aid.
And local philanthropy.
Right.
Yeah, the whole spectrum. The mission was really to distill what leadership practices are actually moving the needle.
And what they found, it seems to boil down to three major interlocking themes that, frankly, challenge the traditional top-down charity models.
You really do.
The first is that you have to view poverty not as some kind of individual failing, but as a systemic challenge.
Number one.
Second, that real progress demands what they call participatory leadership, so deeply rooted in community experience.
And finally, the style that really works. It's something the sources call humble leadership.
If you're out there trying to solve any complex, persistent social problem, poverty, sustainability, you name it, these three themes seem incredibly instructive.
Because they focus on changing structures and mindsets, right? Not just treating the symptoms.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with theme one. This absolute necessity of seeing poverty as a systemic challenge.
Right.
For so long, the default cultural narrative has been built on individual blame. You hear things like, they just need to work harder, or...
They make bad choices.
Oh.
Yeah, we've all heard it.
Yeah.
The leaders interviewed for this study were, well, they were unified in just rejecting that.
They threw it out completely.
They absolutely did. The participants consistently pointed out that what they see day in and day out is poverty rooted in systemic inequities, in generational cycles of just lack of opportunity.
It's not about who to blame.
No, it's about identifying and dismantling these, really destructive structural realities.
And they gave very concrete examples of these barriers. It's not just needing a job. It's limited access to safe, stable housing, which then affects everything else.
Or reliable transportation. I mean, if you can't get to a job or to services, any potential opportunity is basically useless.
It's just out of reach.
And one participant summarized the economic side of it perfectly. They pointed to things like stagnant wages or stagnant wage growth and a lack of educational opportunities.
That's the engine.
That's the engine that keeps the hardship going. It's an economic structure that's just rigged against moving up.
And this structural failure is then compounded by institutional dysfunction. So when the systems that are supposed to help...
Social services, schools...
Right. When they don't work as they're supposed to, that failure just stacks up. One interviewee described it as creating layers and layers and layers of things that aren't working right.
And poverty is just the end result of all those cascading broken systems. It's a feedback loop of inefficiency where one failure, say in housing, causes another in employment, which causes another.
And here's where it gets really interesting, and this is a major policy problem that multiple leaders mentioned. They called it the benefits cliff.
This is probably the most devastating example of a systemic failure in policy design.
Explain what that is.
So the benefits cliff means that someone receiving necessary public assistance, think housing vouchers, food aid, childcare subsidies, might get a small raise at work.
A good thing, you'd think.
You would think. But that slight increase in income immediately triggers the sudden loss of all of those public benefits.
It's not gradual. It's a cliff.
An abrupt, total cutoff. One participant said if you earn half a dollar more over a certain threshold, you suddenly lose all of your benefits.
So working harder, getting a little bit ahead, actually puts your family in a dramatically worse financial position overnight.
It's a massive disincentive.
Hmm.
And leaders stress that policy has to move away from this. It needs a gradual, tiered approach, one that actually, rewards working and trying to get a leg up.
The policy has to stop punishing upward mobility.
Exactly.
And beyond the structural stuff, the leaders also pointed to the corrosive impact of stigma. They noted that economic hardship is so deeply tied to emotional and mental stress.
It's not just a lack of money, it's the isolation, the worry, the constant fear of judgment.
And there's a really painful detail in here where poverty is sometimes used as a weapon, particularly against parents.
That was tough to read. The sources mention that a lack of stable housing, which we've just established is often a systemic failure, is sometimes used as a reason to remove children from their home.
Wow. So the structural problem becomes the justification for a punitive action against the family.
Which puts this immense pressure on leaders. They have to understand that if you're approaching this from a place of judgment, you are completely missing the reality of this situation. The problem is systemic, so the solution has to be collective.
Which is the perfect pivot to the next theme.
It is.
Theme 2, progress through participatory leadership. So if that old hierarchical top-down structure doesn't work,
And it doesn't.
then the solution has to involve the people actually experiencing the issue in a really meaningful way.
And participatory leadership is how you do that. It means actively engaging community members in decision-making, making sure the organization's strategy is grounded in their input, in their lived reality.
Not just some abstract theory of poverty reduction cooked up in an office somewhere.
Exactly. This grounding in lived experience is essential. The most influential leaders they cited were those who had lived experiences with poverty themselves, or a very close connection to it.
One source put it really well. They said theory isn't enough. Leaders have to be following the community that they serve.
Deferring to the local experts. Which brings us to this idea of adaptive learning. Because these systemic barriers, they aren't the same everywhere, right?
Right, they look different in rural Virginia versus, say, a big city.
So continuous learning is required. And the source makes this vital distinction between leadership with a capital L, the organizational heads moving big agendas, and leadership with a lowercase l.
And the lowercase l is?
That's the families and individuals who are the experts, telling their stories to inform that policy.
I think that is such a key insight. It reframes the person seeking help as the necessary expert.
It does. And the crucial part here is that this has to be a two-way street. The organization can't just extract information from the community and then go do its own thing.
They can't just check a box.
No. The sources stress that organizations must be willing to have their own mindsets changed by the community. If the feedback shows your strategy is flawed, you have to be willing to adapt.
That's difficult, though. That requires a huge amount of flexibility.
Yeah.
And a willingness to admit your multi-year plan might need a total overhaul based on what one person is telling you.
And that leads right to the need for what they call collaborative reciprocity, because no single organization can fix systemic poverty alone.
Of course not. The housing group can't solve the transportation problem.
Precisely. So you need coordinated multi-sector collaboration. Leaders have to build these well-working partnerships and collaborations where trust is already established.
So when a complex family situation comes up, one that involves legal, housing, and food issues,
You don't have to start from scratch. You can just pick up the phone. You can mobilize resources because that foundation of trust is already there. The leader's role shifts from being a provider to being a connector.
so they have to know who needs to be at the table or which table.
Exactly. This trust-based networking is just essential for any kind of real systemic solution.
And that brings us to our third and final theme, which is humble leadership. This feels like the essential ingredient to make the whole participatory model actually work.
It's the prerequisite, isn't it?
Yeah.
Humble leadership, as it's defined in the research, it's characterized by a few key behaviors. Self-assessment, genuinely valuing what others contribute, and a radical openness to learning.
And prioritizing serving the community over, personal recognition or ego.
The first component of this is active listening. I mean, truly listening. The leader has to listen to what people need rather than assume what people need.
You can't just walk in with a prepackaged model and expect it to work. You have to shut up and listen first.
And that's the difference between approaching people as a math problem, a set of deficits to be solved, and seeing them as human beings, people who have real needs and real complicated lives.
And since every family situation is unique, a one-size-fits-all solution is basically guaranteed to fail,
It is. Leaders have to invest the time to see that whole picture.
which requires a lot of introspection on the leader's part, which I guess brings us to the second piece: selflessness and ego management.
This is critical. Effective leaders demonstrate the ability to set one's ego aside,
And why is that so important?
because ego is what drives judgment. When a leader sets their ego aside, they're able to see that financial instability is shaped by these broader societal factors, racism, classism, not just individual bad decisions.
They stop thinking of themselves as the savior.
And start thinking of themselves as a facilitator. It's letting go of the need for credit. The humble leader understands that if a family succeeds, the credit belongs to the family and the network that helped them, not to the leader.
And the sources note that leaders in this field, they're motivated by purpose, not wealth.
And that selfless motivation is crucial because this work is incredibly hard. You have to be able to, as one person said, recharge our batteries and get up the next day to fight another battle. If you're just in it for recognition, you will burn out.
Here, finally, we get to compassion and empathy. This is about moving beyond that purely transactional mindset of, oh, gee, we're here to fix you.
Right. Compassionate leaders are the ones actively challenging their own biases and society's biases based on classism, racism, and just plain ignorance.
They have to continually reinforce that fundamental truth that people don't choose to be in poverty.
And that empathy allows them to offer relevant, tailored help because they're seeing the whole person, the whole scope of the challenges, not just the financial line item.
So what does this all mean for us? I mean, the research seems to show that tackling persistent poverty is less about finding some single magic program and more about a fundamental shift in how leadership is exercised. It requires collaboration, active listening, selflessness, and empathy.
Absolutely. And this humble participatory leadership style is so vital because it builds the trust you need between leaders and the community. And maybe most importantly, it's the key way to challenge that deep-seated stigma that's associated with poverty.
It forces the focus away from individual blame and onto structural change.
Exactly.
So based on these findings, the study offered 3 clear, actionable recommendations. First, organizations have to actively integrate humble leadership principles into their leader development and training.
So things like self-awareness, deep listening, openness to feedback, it has to be taught.
Second, they need to aggressively encourage community participatory decision-making. Create formal spaces where community members have a real seat at the table.
So their voice can actually shape strategy and advocacy.
And finally, facilitating collaboration among leaders. Dedicated networking and knowledge exchange to strengthen that collective support you need for these massive problems.
And we should, of course, acknowledge the study's limitations. It had a regional focus on Virginia, and it's based on qualitative interview data.
So it's subjective.
It's based on the perceptions of the leaders themselves, yes. But the universality of these themes, systemic failure, participatory solutions, humble execution, I mean, that feels undeniable.
That's right. And to leave you with one final thought, building on this idea of deep, community-driven change. The source material mentions that truly effective strategies have to go beyond just material support, beyond even policy changes. They require deeper transformations that integrate sustainable, culturally rooted practices. So given that leaders are being encouraged to be so adaptive, so humble and community-driven, what would these deeper transformations actually look like in your own community? And how could they be supported by the kind of leadership models we've discussed today?
A powerful question, and one that really requires listening and self-reflection, doesn't it? Definitely something worth mulling over.